Hi everyone, it's Josh, and with the Oscars right around the corner, I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about all of this year's Best Picture nominees, none of which I have formally reviewed on this channel, and discuss what they're about, what I think of them, my score for each, and what I ultimately think will win and what should win. While I'm not going to be giving away any big spoilers and talking about these films on a mostly surface level, there are some films that require me to touch on minor parts of their plots to flesh out my opinion of each, so I will put a warning up on the screen and in the time signatures in case you don't want to hear any of that. I want to add that while I'm only scraping the surface, I do give maybe enough information that you could maybe infer some things that might happen within the story of some of these films. So if you're one of those people who don't want to have an inkling, like you don't want to know anything at all about a particular film, you're better off just not watching this video or maybe skipping parts of the video of films you're really interested in seeing and you don't want to know anything about. If you're one of those people, watch those films and then come back here later. While you're here, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so that the YouTube gods will bless me. Thank you. First up on the list is American Fiction, written and directed by Cord Jefferson. This film follows Monk, played by Jeffrey Wright, a struggling novelist who's tired of various literature portraying the same and tired offensive tropes of African Americans for profit. As a joke, he decides to write a ridiculous stereotype-filled black book called My Pathology under a pseudonym that, to his surprise, becomes wildly successful, forcing Monk into an artistic crisis. I love the concept of this film because I really fuck with what it's satirizing. I get so tired of Hollywood making the same film over and over again about some form of black suffering and trauma that feels like it's primarily appealing to white liberals who gobble it up like cotton candy. I also really like Jeffrey Wright, who is a gifted actor that exudes confidence and is just naturally cool and smooth in whatever role he's playing. If you want to see another great Jeffrey Wright performance, go watch the first 2 seasons of Westworld. He's great in it. I love those first 2 seasons. Don't talk to me about the 3rd season. It's not great. What really stood out to me beyond the excellent premise are the performances. Everybody here is excellent. Would not be surprised if Sterling K. Brown won an Oscar. Would not be mad if Jeffrey Wright did because he is amazing. Unfortunately, I was a little disappointed at how uneven American Fiction was. The plot I just described only makes up 40% or possibly less than 40% of the actual story, which is mostly a sad family drama. The family drama, to some extent, does support the premise of the film by showing how much more complex the lives of Black Americans are and showing how it's not this monolith. I found a lot of the family drama stuff to be heartfelt and genuinely sad and endearing, but it's so front and center for most of the film that it feels like the film is forgetting or almost neglecting the whole plot of Monk writing this phony book. The conclusion of American Fiction also felt a little chaotic. It suddenly gets very meta and leaves you wondering what exactly Cord Jefferson was trying to say. I personally think that he was making a commentary on how capitalism naturally taints the integrity of the art, but it was weird how the film is mostly not meta and then is suddenly meta at the ending. Would definitely recommend this film despite the imbalanced narrative, which does weigh it down. It's still a very funny, sad, and heartfelt film. I'm gonna give American Fiction a 6 out of 10. The next film nominated is Anatomy of a Fall. This film was written and directed by Justine Triet. It is a French courtroom thriller about a woman who is indicted for the death of her husband after his body is discovered outside of his home with a gash on his head. This film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and I can understand why. It's very well made with good performances from everybody involved, including the lead, Sandra Hüller. Something tells me I'm pronouncing her last name incorrectly because she's German, and so forgive me, all my Germans out there. Thanks. The film honestly could have been called The Fall of a Marriage, which is what it's really about. The story methodically peels back the layers of this relationship between the protagonist and her dead husband, little by little, in a satisfying way that will make you want to fill in the blanks about what happened. Really loved how the film built tension as it went along. It felt like it was giving you bigger and bigger doses of information as it's leading up to its climax. There's clearly a feminist undertone with how the main character, a hardworking and ambitious writer, is judged by the public in terms of what she should and shouldn't do as a mother in this troubled relationship. The film is solid technically, but I wouldn't say it's amazing. I feel like it could have maybe done a little bit more to spice things up. I did like how the film incorporated the camcorder footage from the police interrogations and the media interviews. It added a sense of realism to the film that I think gives it this, this nice gritty tone and atmosphere. My only other gripe with the film is that I found some of the courtroom stuff to be a little silly and unrealistic. I have no idea how the French court system works, but I also have a hard time believing that the prosecutor would be allowed to read passages from the main character's book as a form of evidence or a way to attribute intent to her. That shit would never fly in the US. If it flies in France, then that shit is fucking stupid. Luckily, the sillier courtroom stuff doesn't take too much away from the film, but it was one of those things where it was like, come on, bro. Overall solid film, would definitely recommend. I enjoyed watching it, and I'm going to give Anatomy of a Fall a 7 out of 10. Next up, we have Barbie, written by Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig, who also directs this film. Very big fan of her work. It follows Barbie and her life in Barbie Land, which is great until she has an existential crisis, causing her to develop cellulite and flat feet. Looking for answers, Barbie goes to the real world with Ken to find her owner and discover why this is happening. So I liked Barbie a lot. I think you could definitely nominate it for production design and costume design and things of that nature, which it really excels at. But this film doesn't scream Best Picture nominee to me at all. And I think that's because it doesn't really take itself that seriously. And I don't know, it's not the type of thing that's a Best Picture nominee. You know from the jump that this film is not really looking to change the world or be super serious. It's very satirical and never explains how Barbie Land came into existence, why the Barbies had this voodoo-like connection to their doll forms in the real world. Like, you just have to accept all of that. It does have some potent social commentary about things like body positivity, the patriarchy, and corporate insincerity when it comes to championing feminism and other social issues, but the film handles its commentary in a mostly fun and comedic way. It was for this reason that I was really confused by all the outrage over this film when it first came out. It's not that serious, guys. It's a movie about fucking Barbie dolls, bro. The whole subplot where Ryan Gosling, for example, brings the patriarchy to Barbie Land is ridiculous and great, and I loved it. Ryan Gosling kind of steals the show in this movie. This was a great comedic role for him, and I hope he does more roles like this because he's better at comedy than I think most people give him credit for. My only issue with Barbie is when it does get serious. Sometimes there will be these long, jarring rants made by certain characters like America Ferrera's character, who goes off at one point about the expectations placed on women. I don't have an issue with anything she's saying necessarily. I just think the way the film incorporates these long rants doesn't really fit into the flow of everything that comes before and after it. Outside of these occasional rants, this is a mostly fun and whimsical experience with great direction by Greta Gerwig, who really excels when it comes to directing comedy. I highly doubt Barbie will win Best Picture. The only reason the Oscars threw this in is because it's incredibly popular and they're trying to get more people to watch the program. They've been doing this for several years now. I will say, though, that this film is stronger than some of the films I can remember off the top of my head that have won Best Picture in the past. Green Book. But yeah, if you somehow have been living under a rock and haven't seen this film already, I would definitely recommend it. It's a good time, and I'm gonna give Barbie a 7 out of 10. Next up is The Holdovers. This film was written by David Hemmingson and it was directed by Alexander Payne. It follows Paul, played by Paul Giamatti, who plays a grumpy professor at a New England prep school that's tasked with watching the students who are stuck there during Christmas break. During that time, he develops a bond with a smart yet troubled student and the head cook, who's grieving after the loss of her son. I had zero interest in watching this film. It just didn't look like the type of thing that I'd be interested in. My fiance convinced me to see it during the Christmas break, and honestly, I enjoyed it. It has a very predictable plot. You can see the ending coming from like a mile away, and yet it somehow still works. This movie goes to show that no matter how familiar the idea may be, so long as it's executed and it's genuine and it's heartfelt, it's probably going to be the type of thing a lot of people want to see and will enjoy watching. A lot of the fundamental filmmaking is done really well, whether it's the great performances, the vintage look and feel of the 1970s that it captures so well. It's also really well directed by Alexander Payne, who I think is kind of an underrated director. The film has a lot to say about broken families and kind of the abuse that can happen within families, which is why these characters are so isolated. You can't help but be won over by Paul Giamatti's character, who is initially callous to the idea of family because of nepotism and other forces that have negatively affected him in the past, to then understand the value of being a positive mentor or a father figure. It's all very simple, nothing groundbreaking here, but it kind of just works, and it's not the best film nominated for Best Picture here, but I'd happily recommend it. It's especially great with the family during the holidays. I'm going to give The Holdovers a 6 out of 10. Next up, we have Killers of the Flower Moon. This film was written by Eric Roth and Martin Scorsese, who also directs this film. It tells the story of the murders of the wealthy members of the Osage Nation in the 1920s by a group of greedy white settlers who attempt to steal their head rights. This movie was so good, bro. It was so good. It was definitely in my top 3 for 2023 and is yet another great film in Martin Scorsese's legendary filmography. The movie is like if you took one of Scorsese's gangster films and put it into a Western. It's mostly told through the perspective of Ernest Burkhart, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, who has a complicated love for his wife, Molly Burkhart, played by an excellent Lily Gladstone. A lot of people have criticized the film's portrayal of this character, arguing that he's dumb in a way that's convenient for the story and doesn't sufficiently explain some of his contradictory actions. I simply do not agree. Without getting into too much detail, I think the film communicates in a subtle way that a lot of white folk during this time were a product of a society that's built on stolen wealth and exploitation of indigenous people. I think this character is also a victim of not really having agency and kind of just relying on their family too much for guidance. I would love to comment about this further, but I'm trying to stay away from spoilers. I just want to emphasize that people can be complicated, and the reasons they do what they do can be complicated. I've also heard people criticize this film for being really long at 3.5 hours. I personally was not bothered by that, although I did watch it in 2 sittings, taking a break at the halfway point. Apparently this is the wrong way to watch it, according to editor Thelma Schoonmaker, who argues that theaters who added an intermission at the halfway point are in violation. I understand that taking a break or an intermission at a random point in the film can throw off the rhythm of the story, which can be frustrating as an editor, but 3.5 hours is a lot to ask of people. Like, we have lives, okay? This is honestly the type of film that I think really benefits from streaming because viewers can watch it in a way that doesn't exhaust them, and I don't think this is the type of film where too much is lost from not seeing it at the theater. Anyway, the film looks great, it has an awesome score and soundtrack, the performances across the board are great, and the story is truly insane. A lot of what the film depicts actually happened, and I think that is a huge indictment on the early origins of this country and how blatant some of the crimes were against indigenous people. Is it hard to watch? Sure. But I think the film handles the horror in an appropriate way that doesn't feel like gratuitous tragedy porn. It feels more like a history lesson on how genocide can happen on a smaller, more personal level. The only thing that really bothered me about this film is the ending, which I think calls a little too much attention to itself. I understood why the film made the choice it did at the end, I just didn't find it to be necessary. Either way, I think this film is essential viewing if you're talking about the best of 2023 and a must-watch if you're a fan of Martin Scorsese. I'm going to give The Killers of the Flower Moon a 9 out of 10. Fucking love this movie. Next up is Maestro. This film was written by Josh Singer and Bradley Cooper, who also directs this film. It follows Leonard Bernstein in his quest to become a world-class conductor and his tumultuous relationship with his wife, Licia Montalegre, played by Carey Mulligan. I hate to say this because I think Bradley Cooper is an underrated actor and a talented filmmaker, but this is by far the weakest film of the bunch here. The film has a lot of good ingredients, whether it's the cinematography by Matthew Libatique, the talented cast, the larger-than-life protagonist, the great music, but the unfocused and meandering story unfortunately wastes all the efforts made by everyone. The phenomenal effort on screen largely overshadows the plot itself, which is very slow and hard to get invested in. It wants to be this great film about Leonard Bernstein's genius and be a testament to his great career, but it also wants to be about his conflicted relationship with his wife, and I feel like it just kind of goes back and forth between those two plot lines without really exploring them in a meaningful way. Bernstein's artistic achievements in this film are mostly communicated through telling and not showing. The film does show us the turmoil between Bernstein and his wife in more detail, but nothing about it is really deep or moving. The film wants this relationship to be complex, but it can be mostly boiled down to a man chasing his desires and his wife trying to cope with it. There is an effort to connect the two plots in some way, but it doesn't really work, in my opinion. This is by no means a terrible film. I've seen much worse Oscar bait be nominated and chosen for Best Picture. Green Book! But watching this film was just a chore to get through, unfortunately. I'm gonna give Maestro a 5 out of 10. Next up is Oppenheimer, written and directed by Christopher Nolan. It follows J. Robert Oppenheimer as he's recruited by General Leslie Groves to work with a team of scientists to develop and create the world's first atomic bomb. I'm so happy this film was as successful as it was. It definitely has Barbie and the whole Barbenheimer meme to thank for some of its success, but it's a breath of fresh air that a 3-hour talker was something people came out in droves to see, and really gives me hope that a lot of non-superhero movies can be successful in the future. I had such a hard time when I started writing my review for this film like months ago, which I never released. A big part of the reason why that didn't materialize is because I didn't like it the first time I watched it. I actually kind of hated it. And part of that had to do with me expecting Nolan to continue doing what he had done with his 2 previous films, Tenet and Dunkirk, which featured some of the best action sequences I have seen in like years. I knew Oppenheimer would be more dialogue driven, but I was still expecting there to be these intense experiments and explosions and big action piece spectacles with amazing music. There is a little bit of that, but it's mostly a weird biopic with art house aspirations and an unrelenting sense of urgency that hardly ever slows down. I could not get with the editing style when I first saw this film. I felt like the editor had ADHD with how they don't really hold on shots too long. It just felt like scenes didn't really have the chance to breathe. It wasn't until watching it a second time that the flow and pacing and the structure of the film really clicked for me, and I was like, wow, this is actually like really fucking good. It's a great story about a man who struggles with whether or not what he's doing will actually help the world. On one hand, he firmly believes that an atomic bomb can protect the West from fascism, but on the other hand, he doesn't know if his own country can be trusted with something as powerful as the atomic bomb when politics are involved. The film definitely isn't perfect. There are still some edits that I find to be jarring, some lines feel corny, and some characters feel a little underdeveloped, like Emily Blunt's character. The film also suffers from jamming too many celebrities into it to the point that it starts to feel a little distracting when new characters show up. But Oppenheimer is genuinely an achievement with the story that it's telling, how successful it was. It almost feels like an adult superhero film about a man trying to responsibly use his powers for good. Maybe this is Christopher Nolan's way of throwing shade at Marvel by showing them how a real superhero film is made. I don't know. Cillian Murphy, who was rightfully nominated for Best Actor, breathes so much life into this character. Would love to see him get an Oscar for it. With all that said, definitely check this out if you haven't already. I'm going to give Oppenheimer an 8 out of 10. Next up is Past Lives, written and directed by Celine Song. It follows 2 Korean childhood sweethearts who reconnect years later after the main character, Nora, emigrates to the United States. I was not expecting to like this film as much as I did. It's a super solid sort of romance tale that was simple but very effective. It manages to be a genuinely heartfelt story with an understated and potent meaning. The whole film can be summed up in a beautiful quote said by the mother of the main character where she says, "When you leave something behind, you gain something too." It explores ideas of destiny, the struggle of letting go and holding on. While the tension may be very subtle, the scenes where these characters are connecting again and reigniting the strong bond are really powerful. You're often wondering during these scenes, is it a good idea for this character to leave everything she has in New York, leave her current partner, and go back to what she had with her childhood sweetheart? That's where the central conflict of this film lies, and I love how it uses that conflict to pose the bigger question of, is it the choices we make that determines our lives, or is it the circumstances we find ourselves in that forces us to make the decisions we do? I want to shout out Nicholas Lee for his analysis of this film, which I pulled that quote from for this video. I'll leave a link to his video in the description below. You should definitely check it out if you're looking for a more comprehensive analysis of Past Lives. You ever watch a film that just feels like there's a genuine soul underneath? That's what Past Lives feels like, and I definitely got emotional watching it because of this. I just feel like there's something about it that's so relatable and so easy to understand. I can see some people maybe not liking it because of how subtle it is and the nature of it being a slow burn type of film where characters are just talking in a room for long periods of time. But if you're paying attention and you listen closely to what the film is trying to tell you, I think you'll like this a lot. I'm going to give Past Lives an 8 out of 10. Next film up is Poor Things. This film was written by Tony McNamara and Yorgos Lanthimos, who also directs this film. The basic plot is that a mad scientist reanimates the body of a dead woman with the brain of a baby who goes out into the world and explores it and quickly develops into a nympho. I might be oversimplifying that a little bit, but that's basically the plot. I highly recommend watching this by yourself or someone you're super comfortable with because, man, this is an uncomfortable film with lots of disturbing graphic sexual content. I watched this film with my fiance and her mother, and yeah, that was the worst decision I made of 2023, by far. This is probably the best film from Yorgos Lanthimos, which is saying a lot, since his filmography is already stacked with quality work, whether it's The Lobster, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, The Favorite. I saw this months ago, and I still think about it every now and again. Poor Things is like a fucked up fairy tale funhouse that is often hilarious, but also very dark and disturbing. The premise basically serves as a vehicle to challenge a lot of societal norms in a way that doesn't feel pretentious or contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. It's kind of a coming-of-age tale where you're basically watching a toddler-brained woman discover the world and liberate herself from the boxes that society or men try to put her into. What I find so impressive about Poor Things is that while it's really out there and super bizarre and weird, it's also surprisingly accessible and satisfying, more so than a lot of other Yorgos Lanthimos films. It is very dark and disturbing, and there were parts that definitely shook me, but there's a strong sense of hope that runs through it, which plays into one of the main themes of the film, taking the good with the bad, experiencing the horror and tragedy of life, basically taking everything that life can throw at you, which makes us people of substance and not just privileged, fickle people. I have no idea how this film was made for $35 million. It looks like it was made for $100 million, whether it's the amazing steampunk set design, the cinematography by Robbie Ryan, the score by Jerskin Fendrix, and the acting by the entire cast, including Emma Stone, who has reached a high point with this film and should absolutely get an Oscar for it. This is the best performance I've seen from her ever. It is an incredibly demanding role that a lot of actresses would understandably pass on because of the high-risk, high-reward nature of it. Whether it's the countless disturbing sex scenes or basically playing a mentally challenged woman, this could have been very embarrassing and a career destroyer if not handled really well. Emma Stone and the entire crew really just knock it out of the park with this film. It's the best film of 2023. I don't know of anything else I saw that was better than this. I'm going to give Poor Things a 9 out of 10. It's close to a 10, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a 9 because a 10 out of 10 is a perfect film, and I don't want to just give those out. So there you go. Finally, we have The Zone of Interest. This film was written and directed by Jonathan Glazer, who is a very fascinating filmmaker. The film follows Rudolf Haas and his wife Hedwig, who strive to build a great life for their family and a house and garden right next to Auschwitz, which Rudolf is the commandant of. This is the type of film that just stays with you long after you watch it. I think a lot of that has to do with the sound design, which just is painful to listen to if you're paying close attention. It is very much a Jonathan Glazer type of experience with how abstract it can be. There were some sequences that I just wasn't able to wrap my head around. I saw this at the theater and I thought the film reel had broke or something when it started because of a certain choice he makes at the very beginning and makes again in other parts. Even though I wasn't able to decipher all of the symbolism of the film, the main point it's making is clear as day, and it's really just the banality of evil. Glazer said in an interview with the New York Times recently that, quote, "I wanted to dismantle the idea of this family as anomalies, as almost supernatural. The idea that they came from the skies and ran amok, but thank God that's not us and it's never going to happen again. I wanted to show that these crimes were committed by Mr. and Mrs. Smith at number 26. Throughout the entire film, the horror is never explicitly shown. It's always in the background or in the sound mix or implied, and I think this is a great metaphor for how we as humans treat the horrors around us. The film is not saying that we're Nazis. It's saying that we're human just like the Nazis were, and we have a tendency to turn a blind eye to things that society has deemed okay, even if subconsciously or consciously we might think something is off. The United States for years had accepted the institution of slavery as a normal, everyday thing because society at large had basically accepted it for so long. Why is it okay? Don't think about it. It's just okay. It wasn't these evil, shadowy figures who carried out these crimes. It was these ordinary, boring, everyday people who share more in common with us than we'd like to think. The film beautifully captures this through its fly-on-the-wall approach. There's no lighting, and the filmmakers ran several cameras and mics simultaneously, allowing actors to improvise and move around freely as if they're living their everyday life. This is kind of a hard film to recommend because of how weird and unconventional it is, but it definitely stands out as one of the more unique films about the Holocaust and the people involved. I'm going to give The Zone of Interest an 8 out of 10. And there you have it. Those are all my thoughts on all of this year's Best Picture nominees. In terms of what will win, it looks like Oppenheimer is the strong favorite based on what I've read online, not just for Best Picture, but a slew of other awards. I think it definitely deserves it, not just for being a great film, but also for kind of proving that a 3-hour biopic can be super successful today. There's a lot of great films here, several of which I do like better than Oppenheimer, but Oppenheimer does truly stand out when it comes to its success and significance on cinema. What I think should win personally is Poor Things. I think when we're just talking about quality overall, Poor Things brings so much to the table. Killers of the Flower Moon is a close second, but Yorgos Lanthimos took really risky source material and turned it into an amazingly bizarre fairy tale about liberation, something that I think a lot of directors would have failed to do. I do want to shout out the Oscars for picking a quality list of nominees this year. If the weakest films on your list is Maestro, The Holdovers, and American Fiction, I think you did a pretty good job. This is probably the best list of nominees I can remember since I did my first Oscars Roundup video back in 2018. That list was very strong, and this one might honestly be stronger. Let me know what you think of this list though. Is it a great list? Is it a bad list? Is there some things the Oscars might have missed? Is there a film that I'm wrong about here? Let me know what you think in the comments. Feel free to leave a recommendation on a film or TV show that I should watch next while you're down there. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so you can know when I drop the next one. I'm gonna go walk the dog now and rest my voice because it is very tired. So yeah, have a great day, have a great night, and I'll see you later. Bye.